Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. The FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report is sponsored by the Red Flag Group. The Red Flag Group is a business advisory, information services, technology firm that helps clients manage risk areas across 4 key risk areas, including sales and sales channels, includes distributors, resellers, and partners, suppliers, customers, and human capital, which of course includes employees and contractors. Check out more information on the Red Flag Group at their website, www.redflaggroup.com. Today I am in a series of the 10 Hallmarks of Effective Compliance Program. This is a series I've wanted to do for some time. So this podcast is going to be quite a bit different. It's going to be short, right, 10 minutes or so. And we're going to go into specific hallmark of the best practices was articulated by the Department of Justice and Securities and Exchange Commission in the 2012 FCPA Guidance. This series is based upon my seminal work on doing compliance, which is of course entitled Doing Compliance, Design, Create, and Implement an Effective Anti-Corruption Compliance Program. You can check out my book at Compliance Week. You can go to their site, www.complianceweek.com, and then click under Thought Leadership, then in-depth reports, and scroll down, you'll see my books available. So I hope you will check it out. I hope this podcast series might interest you in learning a little bit more about the actual doing of compliance. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox again, and today we're on Hallmark number 2 of the 10 Hallmarks of an Effective Compliance Program. Hallmark number 2 is entitled Code of Conduct and Compliance Policies and Procedures. The cornerstone of an FCPA anti-corruption compliance program is its written protocols. This includes a code of conduct, policies, and procedures. In the FCPA guidance, the DOJ and SEC state, a company's code of conduct is often the foundation upon which an effective compliance program is built. As the DOJ has repeatedly noted in its charging documents, the most effective codes of conduct are clear, concise, and accessible to all employees and to those conducting business on the company's behalf. Indeed, it would be difficult to effectively implement a compliance program if it is not available in the local languages. So with a shout out to Mr. Translations himself, Jay Rosen, you need to have your code of conduct and your compliance program translated into local languages. When assessing a compliance program, the Department of Justice and SEC will review whether the company has taken steps to make certain that the code of conduct remains current and effective, whether it's periodically reviewed and updated its code of conduct. Compliance best practices requires a company to have additional standards and controls, obviously including detailed due diligence protocols for screening third-party business partners, for criminal backgrounds, financial stability, and improper association with foreign governments. And these effective standards and controls are there to demonstrate that your compliance program is more than just a piece of paper or a paper code of conduct or a paper compliance program. So let's now turn to the code of conduct. Your code of conduct should demonstrate a complete ethical attitude of your company and your organization's system-wide emphasis on compliance and ethics with all applicable laws and regulations. Your code of conduct should be aimed at all employees and all representatives of the organization, not just those actively involved in known compliance issues. From the board of directors all the way to volunteers, everyone must receive, read, and understand and agree to abide by the standards of the code of conduct. That means you need to have documentation for each one of those steps, that they've received the code of conduct, they've read the code of conduct, they've understood the code of conduct, and they've agreed to abide by it. Now that can be one piece of paper signed off or one documentation in your technology-based system, but you have to have documentation as to those. But it also should include management, vendors, suppliers, independent contractors, as these are frequently overlooked groups. There are several purposes information which should be communicated in your code of conduct. Of course, the overriding goal is for all employees to follow what is required of them. You can do this by communicating what's required of them and to provide for proper decision making, and then to require that such persons subject to the code put these standards into everyday business practices. some actions of your are the best evidence that your company upholds and supports a proper code of conduct. The substance of your code should be tailored to the company's culture and to the industry and your corporate identity. It should provide a mechanism by which employees who are trying to do the right thing in compliance and business ethics can do so. That means it needs to be accessible and readable. It should be used as a basis for review and evaluation. It can certainly be invoked if there is a violation. And to this end, I would suggest that your company's disciplinary procedures be stated in the Code of Conduct. This would include all forms of discipline up to and including dismissal for various violations of your Code of Conduct. Further, your Code of Conduct should emphasize it will comply with all applicable laws and regulations wherever it does business. And let me emphasize again, it needs to be written in plain English and translated into other languages as necessary so that all applicable persons can understand it. I often say the three most important things in an FCPA or other anti-bribery and anti-corruption compliance program are document, document, document. This is true, again, of communicating your code of conduct. You need to do simply more than put it on your website and tell the folks it's here, it's available, and they should read it at their leisure. As I said, you need to document that all employees have received a copy of the code of conduct, they understand it, and they've agreed to abide by it. For employees, it is important that a representative of the compliance function explain the standards set forth in your code and be there to answer any questions in a training that employees might have. Your employees need to attest in writing that they have received, read, and understood and agreed to abide by this code of conduct, and this attestation must be retained and updated as appropriate. The Department of Justice expects that each compliance program will begin with a very public and robust code of conduct. If you don't have one, you need to get one forthwith. Hopefully everyone listening to this has one going forward. So what's the value of having a code of conduct? It's that you're allowing the person who wants to do business in the right way to do the right way. So it's also what the Department of Justice and Securities and Exchange Commission are going to look for is the first pass in reviewing your compliance program. So what about policies, procedures, and controls? Written policies and procedures are required for a best practices compliance program. This is really nothing new. It's well known and long established. Indeed, the FCPA Guidance states, among the risks the company needs to address include the nature and extent of transactions with foreign governments, payments to foreign officials, use of third parties, gifts, travel, and entertainment, charitable donations, and political contributions, facilitating and expediting payments. Your policies help form the basis of your expectations of conduct of your company. They build upon and expand upon what was set out in your code of conduct, and the procedures are your documents that implement these standards of conduct. Another way to think of this is really, and one of the best formulations I've seen was stated by Aaron Murphy in his book, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. He says you should think of all three as an interrelated set of compliance mechanisms. He goes on to state that internal controls are policies, procedures, monitoring, and training that are designed to ensure that company assets are properly used with proper approval and that transactions are properly recorded in the books and records. While it's theoretically possible to have good controls but bad books and records and vice versa, the two generally go hand in hand, and where there are record-keeping violations and internal controls failure is almost presumed because the records would have been accurate had the controls been adequate. The FCPA guidance ends this section with the following, which I think is fairly significant. Regardless of the specific policies and procedures implemented, these standards should apply at all levels of the company. In other words, it's important that the policies and procedures are fairly and consistently applied across the organization. This is because if policies are applied in an inconsistent manner, there is a greater chance that the employee will be dismissed for breaching a policy that he or she could successfully claim they were unfairly terminated. I cannot overemphasize this last point too much. This means if you're going to fire employees in Brazil for fudging their expense accounts, you have to fire employees in the United States for doing the same thing, even if it happens to be the top producer. If you don't administer your code of conduct, your policies and procedures fairly and consistently, you'll have no credibility going forward. This has been a quick wrap-up of Hallmark number 2. Once again, these come from my book, Doing Compliance, Design, Create, and Implement an Effective Compliance Program, which you can find at the Compliance Week website. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode. So I'm trying to do a written and audio series for everyone. If you would like to utilize this audio in any of your training materials, please contact me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com, and we can make arrangements for that as well. Also, once again, the series is based upon my textbook or my book, Doing Compliance, Design, Create, and Implement an Effective Compliance Program. And I would urge you to go to Compliance Week and check out my book. If you'd like any more information, I have much more detail in the book. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to thank you very much for listening to this episode.